So we had stated that the most important subclass of reader was InputStreamReader. So let's take a look at the InputStreamReader. So a quick overview, very short presentation here. I want to introduce the input stream reader, which is going to be pretty similar to what we've seen with the byte stream. It's just a character stream. We'll look at the class declaration, we'll look at the constructors, we'll look at the methods, and we'll look at the examples, and just kind of get you familiar with the two core sets of methodologies that we can use to read files into our application, write files out of our application. So here, an input stream reader in Java is a character input stream that uses the stream of bytes as its data source, right? It acts as a bridge between an incoming stream of bytes and an outgoing sequence of characters, and it converts a byte stream into a character stream, right? So it's doing all of that internal conversions for you. That's the advantage of using it. It's not that you couldn't do this with a input stream, a byte stream, but it does. It hides some of that from you, so you can just focus on writing and reading text. So the Java input stream reader reads bytes from a specified input stream and converts or translates it into Unicode characters according to the default or specified character encoding. So in other words, the data read from the source input stream are decoded from bytes using the specified char set. So an input stream reader is a concrete class of reader, right? It's the first concrete class that we're looking at, and arguably the most important, that extends. And then the reader itself, if you recall, is an abstract class that extends object. It is also a super class of file reader. So file reader, it extends the input stream reader, which extends reader, which extends object. And so input stream reader implements closable, auto-closable, and readable. And so basically the general syntax would look like this if you were to look at the source code and get an idea of what the inheritance hierarchy is and what its membership in terms of what it can be treated as. So it could be an input stream reader, it could be a reader, it could be closable and auto-closable, and it could be a readable. Let's take a look at the constructors. So there is a couple different constructors. The first I want to look at is the fact that it's just like a, you want to think about an input stream reader potentially as like a filtered input stream where you could pass in an input stream into the input stream reader. So the constructor creates an input stream reader object that uses the default character encoding to convert bytes into characters. So the general syntax to create an object of the input stream class is given below, right? So you do a new input stream reader, and then you pass it in some input stream and then you can say from it a instance of input stream reader. So here the parameters to the constructor of input stream reader is of type input stream. So say for instance, we can pass system.in. So that's a pre-existing input stream. We can pass a reference to that in and then wrap our input stream reader around that input stream. So again, it's very much like a filtered, it's kind of like the filtered input streams we looked at, where we pass it an input stream and it adds that new functionality on top. Whereas the new functionality for us is it processes all of the bytes directly into characters. Let's see, another constructor we have is we can pass in an input stream and we can pass in a string that represents the character set name that we actually want to use for converting our bytes into. So there's more than one character set. So they have a default, but you can also change from that default. And that's what that second parameter would be. And you would use whatever the label is as a string. And if it's not recognized, then it's going to throw an unsupported encoding exception to you. They have an input stream reader where you can pass in an input stream and you can actually pass in a data type of character set, effectively a char set. And again, that's used to be able to decode bytes into that type of characters. And then you also have another data type doing something very similar where it's called char set decoder, just another data type used to define the character set, then how to decode a set of bytes into characters. So there's a couple of different ways you can do that using a string, or these two different data types. Okay, let's look at some of the methods. So in addition to the methods inherited from the reader class, the InputStreamReader also defines some of its own methods that then get inherited by everything else that that extends it. So we already looked at the methods inside of Reader in the previous presentation. So here there's just a couple more. So we can get encoding. So get encoding, this method returns the name of the character encoding being used by the stream, because again, we can define what the encoding type is. We have the ability to read, that's going to return back an integer. So this method reads a single character, returns it back as an int because it could be a -1 if we're at the end of the stream. And then if we want to get the actual car value of it, we could just cast it. We have the read method that, again, that you had that abstract method inside of the reader abstract class. So we have to implement it in the InputStreamReader. That's the method that used the character array and then had an NMM value so that you could get a offset and a number of characters you want to read. So this method reads a characters into a portion of an array. And then we have that ready method. And so this method checks whether the stream is ready to be read, and then it returns true if the stream is ready to be read or not. So let's just look at some examples of this code to see what it looks like in action. So let's take a simple example program where we read the data from a file and display it on the console using the InputStreamReader class. So here is our code, but I prefer to use. So here we have InputStreamReader here. Let's take a quick look at this. So I'm going to import my file input stream. I'm going to go ahead and import my InputStreamReader, right? That's what we're actually looking at. I'm going to import my IO exception. I'm going to create a class so I can have a main method. I'm going to have my main method throw the IO exception, so I can just have my code here. Here, I'm going to create a new file input stream. Because remember, I can't directly build an InputStreamReader. I need to create a file input stream, and then I wrap my InputStreamReader around it, and that gives my file input stream those additional functionalities. And then I use the file stream reader to do everything I want. And this, what we've been seeing a lot is what's called a wrapper design pattern, by the way, where we can build this more primitive thing and then provide access to this more complex thing that builds on top of the primitive thing using a composition approach. Okay, so here we have the new InputStreamReader where we're going to pass it in a reference of my file input stream, and I'm going to save that as instream. And then I'm going to read that first piece of data as an integer. And so long as that value that I'm reading from my my reader isn't a -1, I'm going to cast it into a character, and I'm going to print it out, and then I'm going to read the next. I'm going to keep doing that until I read. And so let me see what's inside of my file.txt. We already know it's welcome to Java programming. So let me go ahead and run that, and we can see we're going to actually go ahead and get that to display out. Welcome to Java programming. Okay, we just have a couple more examples. Let's take a look at the next. So in the next example, what I want to do is I want to use some of the methods that are defined strictly inside of this class, right? The new class, the file input stream, the reader class. So that was ready and get encoding, right? So let's look at a InputStreamReader code that uses those. And again, let me just jump over here. InputStreamReader here that's going to use those. Here, I'm going to import my file input stream so that I can actually build an input stream, and then I'm going to get the InputStreamReader that I'm going to pass a reference of my file input stream to, so I can actually use it to read characters. I'm going to go ahead and import my IO exception. I'm going to have my main method throw that IO exception. I'm going to create a new instance of a file input stream, and I'm going to use just a file path of my file.txt. So remember that just is welcome to Java programming. I'm going to build an InputStreamReader around this file input stream object that I built, right? Because we're going to wrap this character stream around the byte stream so that we can then use our reader to read characters. I'm going to get the encoding, and let's actually run this. Let's see what the encoding is. So when I go ahead and get the encoding and print it out, you'll see it's the default encoding is UTF-8. Then I'm going to use that ready method. I'm going to say, hey, are you ready for reading? Initially, it's going to say, yeah, it's true. Then, so long as there's characters, so instead of having to read it like I was before, where I was just waiting to get a -1, I can keep asking if it's ready. And by ready, does it still have data? Does it still have tokens? Does it still have something inside of the reader that I can access? And so long as that's true, I'm going to read that byte value. I'm going to save it as an int, and I'm going to cast it as a car, and I'm going to print it out. And I'm going to do that until ready's not true anymore. I'm going to prove it's not true anymore by printing out the state after the while loop is done. And we can see, oh yeah, we print out the entire contents of that myfile.txt. And to prove that ready does toggle to false, when you're at the end of your stream, we could see, oh yes, that's the printout right on line 22. Excellent. The next sample that I just kind of want to show you with this particular class is I want to create a program where we can take a character as input from the keyboard and not from a file and display that on the console. So again, just highlighting that we can use input streams that aren't necessarily file input streams. So let's jump here. And this is just a very small, simple code. I'll run it here, but I won't do anything yet. So it's currently running. Okay, so I'm going to import my IO exception. I'm going to import my InputStreamReader. Notice I'm not going to import another input stream because I'm going to use the default input stream we all have access to that's part of the static class. So I'm going to create my class. I'm going to have my main method throw an IO exception. And so now when I go to create an input stream reader, it doesn't have to be on a input stream I create. I can use a pre-created one, system.in, which defaults to the keyboard. And I'm going to create my character input stream, my reader off of that. So now ISR represents my input stream that is now wrapped around system.in. So I'm going to create a prompt inner character, and then I'm going to read that character and then print it out. So here you could see enter a character. I'll enter the character queue. I'll hit enter, and notice there it did. It went ahead and read as soon as I inserted from my keyboard a character into the keyboard's input stream, into the system's input stream. The input stream reader then pulled it with that read command. In fact, it was going to wait until something was inserted from the keyboard, just like what the scanner does. So now what you're starting to see is the underlying mechanics of how scanner works. And then it printed it out. And so there's just one last example I want to show with this particular class. And it's actually, I want to do a recursive read method. So this is probably the first time we'll look at recursion, but I want to start motivating this, and we'll have a completely dedicated presentation just on recursion sometime in the future, but this will give you a little taste of it. So what I want to do is I want to take the simple program from example 2, and I want to refactor the logic. So instead of using a while loop to read all of our characters from the reader, I want to use a recursive method. So a method that will continually read everything from my stream until I run out of things. So here, I just want to show an alternate way that we can do this. So we're going to compare and contrast. So remember, this was example 2, where we had this while loop. So while is ready, or well, I'm sorry, while in stream ready is true, we were reading a byte as an int, then we were casting that as a character, and then we were printing that to the display. Well, let's see how we can do that same logic but as removing the looping logic from a while loop and packing it into a method instead. So a recursive definition, a recursive method is a method that can call itself until it hits some base case where it stops. So our base case is when there's no more characters to be read. So let's see how we can do this. We're going to import our file input stream because we're going to read from a file. It's going to be my file here, the one that says welcome to Java programming. We're going to import our input stream reader because that's what we've been looking at. We're going to import our IO exception. We're going to import our class. Our main method's going to throw this IO exception. We're going to create a new file input stream object, and we're going to use the file path of myfile.txt that has the contents. And I'm going to run this so we can see that it's going to work from the get-go. So here it's doing the exact same thing that example 2 did, where it gives you the encoding and then says, oh, are we ready yet? True. Then it's going to read all the text. And then when it has no more text it can read, no more characters from the stream, it's ready. It's going to be returning false after that. So let's see how this is actually implemented and how differently it's implemented. So I'm going to still create this file input stream. And then I'm going to go ahead and build an input stream reader around that file input stream. Then I'm going to get the encoding. That's the same. This is the same. We're just saying that the encoding is UTF. That way, just left that in so that there was no differences. But now notice this, where we had before, we have ready and ready. So we had that before in example 2, but what was in between there was this while loop, right? So between this ready, which returned true, and this ready that returned false, we had a while loop that kept looping through everything until ready became false. Well, we can always express any looping logic in Java as opposed to using a while loop. We can always express it as a function call that itself calls itself. So here, notice, where did it go? Oh, here. So here, I'm just going to call this function recursive read, and I'm going to pass it the input stream. Now, what is recursive read? Well, recursive read is a method that returns a Boolean. It's a method I defined, right? A static method. It's part of this class. It returns a Boolean, and it takes in an input stream reader, because the idea is we want to read a character off each time we call this, so that the stream gets a character smaller with each successive call. Again, since we're doing reads, we also have to throw an IO exception on here, or we have to do a try-catch block. So this is our base case. We stop calling our recursive read when there's nothing left to read. So we'll check our input stream. If ready is equal to false, we're going to return back a false value. Oh, it's time to exit out of this. So we're going to just return false. If it's not false, that means there's still things inside of our input stream reader. So we're going to read it. So this is our recursive case. This is what we do if we're not in our base case where it's empty. We're going to read a value from our input stream reader, right? That byte value. In fact, this is the same logic that's inside of our while loop, right? We're going to then take that byte value and cast it as a character. We're going to take that character and print it out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to return back whatever we get by calling that recursive read, the same function. So we're calling the function within itself, but we've mutated the state of our input stream so that we've read something out of it. And since this itself returns back a Boolean value, it's a suitable target as a return type, because I claim to be returning back a Boolean, but this is going to resolve to be a Boolean because a function call to itself is going to return back that thing. And eventually, when the input stream, when in stream ready is equal to false, I do eventually have a return type, right? I do end up returning false. So it'll never return true. I'll just keep invoking this function again and again and again until it finally reads everything out of it and returns a false. And then it just unwinds everything off my call stack, my method call stack, my activation stack. And then I get a behavior that's very much like a while loop, right? So the logic here is very while. This is effectively the while portion by invoking the method itself. And this is effectively the thing that stops the while loop, right? The evaluation, my base case. And so this prevents it from looping again, so we don't hit an infinite loop of calling the method infinitely. So I just wanted to kind of illustrate how a couple of things here. I can pass input stream readers as arguments into methods. And I also want to show how we can read everything using a recursive definition and not just these iterative definitions or these repetition definitions we've been seeing in terms of while loops or for loops. And so I really also want to motivate this idea of recursion, because we will look at that much deeply later on. So with that said, does anyone have any questions about what we've covered today? And I want to say that that is really all I really want to cover. We did a great job with the amount of content we're going to cover, and I think these reader streams are going to be much easier because we've already examined everything with the byte streams. And I'm looking really forward to being able to get to serialization. Okay, well, there's no questions. I'll go ahead and end today's lecture, and I will see everyone tomorrow then.